When Godzilla Minus One came out, I was floored. It was a fantastic movie, and I already left a review about it, but one of the things that I rave about in that review is the human element. It's very rare to find a monster movie or a movie featuring kaiju or some kind of creature that doesn't drop the ball on the human element. The closest thing that captures this essence effectively are movies featuring aliens, but even they tend to treat characters as expendable avatars for us to ponder what it would be like to be in their shoes. Often, they don't invest much in character depth, leaving us with characters we don't really care about, just waiting to see if they bite the dust. Even in monster movies, when humans meet their demise, it often leaves me quite unfazed, even if they're the main character. It's like they're merely a means to an end in telling the story. What intrigues me, though, is how people discuss the differences between movies like Godzilla Minus One and the 2014 Monsterverse Godzilla, which served as a kind of reboot for the American take on it. When I watched the 2013 version of Godzilla, which started off the Monsterverse franchise, I was really excited, but I was only excited to see Godzilla, and we didn't even get much of that. We got the antagonist monsters, the Mutos, then we got the payoff with the fight, but again, that wasn't much. The human element in that movie felt so far removed that if you ask me what the names are of the main characters, I couldn't tell you. I really don't care. If you asked me to recount their journey, I couldn't tell you. The issue seems to persist throughout the Monsterverse movies, even those featuring Millie Bobby Brown, or as we know her as Eleven, the Stranger Things girl. Despite her popularity from Stranger Things, beyond being the daughter of one of the main characters, I really do struggle to recall her purpose or anything significant that she did. It's frustrating when people argue that Godzilla movies have always been like this. Just because it's a long-standing characteristic, does that mean we should overlook it as an issue? If 90% of the movie is comprised of very boring human characters and only 10% are the monsters, don't you think that's an issue to be addressed? Is it possible that you can still enjoy a franchise, but point out the disadvantages and cons about it, like Pokemon? You can still be a true fan of something and acknowledge when there's a facet of the franchise that you love that needs improvement. Take, for example, Jurassic Park. I've talked about this at length before in other videos. Jurassic Park is also a monster movie, one of my favorite franchises about dinosaurs that were created via cloning. And I remember every single one of the characters' names who were the main characters. Alan Grant, Ellie Sattler, Ian Malcolm, John Hammond, Lex and Tim, his grandchildren, Dennis Nedry, the coder, Mr. Arnold who got his arm chewed off, and the blood-sucking lawyer. I can remember iconic things that they said throughout their dialogue, even from the time I saw it as a little pup. Even though I was eager to see the dinosaurs, the suspense and the execution of those movies made me interested and worried about the main characters, even though they were humans. Okay, maybe not Lex, because she was annoying as shit. But I liked Ellie and Ian and Alan Grant, and I worried for them. I found myself truly engaged in their journey. They weren't just humans thrown into roles to create suspense about whether or not they're going to get eaten. These characters had substance and underwent some character development. Alan, who initially couldn't stand kids, slowly learned to bond with them as he had to survive and protect them. Ellie Sattler, a sweet, peaceful woman, had to fight for her life, transforming into a strong, resilient survivor. The excitement of John Hammond's face as he witnessed his dream unfold, only for others to knock it down and prove their theory right, with chaos prevailing, added depth to the narrative. I emphasized with him the most because he genuinely desired to create something wonderful for the world and leave a legacy that could bring joy for many, many centuries even after he was gone. Despite everyone warning him that it was a bad idea, he had to witness how true those warnings became, and his grandchildren also had to experience that as well, much to his chagrin, because he was worrying about them the whole time. Ian Malcolm was just there to be sexy. Everyone knows his saying, his line, "Life finds a way." Each of the human characters had an element to them that was integral to the story and the progression of it. That is what helped make Jurassic Park so iconic and why we know the human characters. But in the Godzilla Monsterverse films, and maybe that's just a personal take, I can't remember one name. Actually, I remember two. So, the one I remember is Serizawa, the guy who sacrificed himself to help Godzilla get back on his feet. I love that man. He was great, even though I don't really remember much else that he said except for "let them fight." That was basically it, and maybe it's because he's Japanese. And also, the other name is the little girl named Gia. And I only remember her because she's Kong's friend, and I used her in my adult audio fanfiction story of the Monsterverse Adventures. That's the only reason. And for everyone else, I have to constantly look them up. Out of sight, out of mind. Godzilla vs. Kong is the most recent movie I've watched at the time of this video. If there were 3 main characters in there, I think there were, or 2 or 4, I'm not sure. I didn't even remember that they were a part of the movie, and this includes Millie Bobby Brown. Immediately, just thinking off the top of my head from Godzilla Minus One, the human character I remember the most is Noriko. The scene where she risked her life for the love of her life moved me to tears. I don't even recall Shikishima saying her name that much, but it's etched into my memory. And I have to admit, I remember her name more than anybody else's. I also know the very smart guy's name is Kenji, and even though I can't recall all the names of everyone else, I remember their faces and their roles in the movie. I recall the other pilot mechanic who felt disappointed in Shikishima for abandoning his kamikaze role. Shikishima's haunting guilt wasn't just about desertion, but also the weight of not saving the men on the island and the PTSD from confronting Godzilla in his pre-evolved form as he just obliterated those men when the kamikaze pilot had another chance to save them and didn't because he was in total fear and knew it wouldn't amount to much. The narrative had multiple layers in Godzilla Minus One, and a poignant moment was a general who wanted former soldiers to fight. He assured them there was no shame if they chose not to fight, and we witnessed some who stayed and one by one decided to join the fight. I can still vividly remember the look on his face, and just recounting it brings tears to my eyes because it had such an emotional impact. Also, the little girl under the care of Noriko and Shikishima left a lasting impression. Despite not being their child, they chose to be parents to her, forging a bond and falling in love in the process. I also remember that heart-wrenching scene of a little girl crying, repeatedly asking where Noriko was, and Shikishima struggling to find the words to tell her she was gone, while he was also hurting. Oh my god, just recounting this, I could feel the raw emotions that I felt as I was watching Godzilla Minus One for the first time. I'm genuinely surprised that when I recall the movie Godzilla Minus One, what stands out are the faces of the humans. Both main characters and those in absolute fear, and the side characters as Godzilla, the malevolent, unforgiving, destructive force, tore through the remnants of their homes. It's so remarkable how well this kaiju movie portrayed that aspect, surpassing even the Monsterverse Godzilla movies. Now, I understand people might argue that they belong to different categories of movies, and I do love and support the Monsterverse movies. I do kind of agree with this in some regard. However, when it comes to quality, a well-crafted storyline, and a comprehensive cinematic experience, Godzilla Minus One unquestionably takes the lead, in my opinion. While the Monsterverse Godzilla movies may offer more of this blockbuster entertainment factor, I see Godzilla Minus One as a higher quality production, more poignant, more artistic, despite operating on a much smaller budget. It doesn't mean that the Monsterverse movies are totally bad, because they do one thing that Godzilla Minus One does not, which is give the kaiju personality, make them feel more real like animals. We learn more about them, and that's wonderful in its own right, but the thing that made Godzilla Minus One scary and mysterious and hit home harder is that people didn't really know that much about it, and the thing did not care. It was just reacting. These people in the movie, they made speculations, but there weren't monarch outposts like all around the world studying this creature. While future movies in the Godzilla Minus One franchise might explore this aspect if they decide to continue, if we're comparing Godzilla Minus One to the 2014 Monsterverse Godzilla, in my opinion, Godzilla Minus One stands out as the superior Godzilla movie. I want to emphasize, again, for the third or fourth time, that this is a personal opinion. It does not mean that I am throwing shade to anyone who thinks differently or who enjoyed Monsterverse movies more or Godzilla Minus One more. It's just intriguing to hear various perspectives from Godzilla fans who enjoyed both or had a preference, as it honestly could set a standard for future movies. I believe Godzilla Minus One is the kind of movie that even those outside the Godzilla fandom could watch and find enjoyable. There are a few people that I know who watched the 2014 Godzilla on principle because they've heard about Godzilla, they grew up with it, but they didn't care to watch the subsequent films due to it being campy, the words that one of them used. I can see where they're coming from. I don't blame them for that perspective. It's true that too much of something can lead it to becoming a parody of itself, akin to what happened with Fast and the Furious. Even though I find them entertaining, there's a certain charm that gets lost as sequels progress a story that was originally intended to be instructive and scary or serious. This phenomenon is reminiscent of what occurred with franchises like Jurassic Park. The essence of the initial thrill tends to diminish with each installment. I think in the realms of the Godzilla universe, this is excused a bit more with a niche audience who are fans of it, but it could put off general audiences because it's not their thing. And that's okay, but we have to acknowledge that if you want this franchise to stay around a lot longer, you're going to have to appeal to broader sensibilities. There are enough Godzilla fans out there who would probably keep the franchise going, yes, but we also have to remember that studios run on money. And despite the unwavering support from us fans, if the audience isn't substantial enough, especially considering the inflated budgets that these movies are coming out with nowadays, studios might not deem it profitable to continue. So that's why I like having conversations like this. I think that these conversations are important because we want these franchises to continue. That's why I hold Disney and other corporations in high regard when it comes to quality. We're not hating on them just to hate on them. We're holding them to the same standard of quality that they've always possessed decades ago, before a lot of us were even born. I was able to watch Disney movies from my mother and grandmother's time and still enjoy them and recognize their quality and entertainment. That is how you know you have a good movie. Something that will stand the test of time, like Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Snow White, and will continue challenging the art form, causing people to continuously ignite their passion. That's just my opinion, but I'd love to have a discussion with you guys in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Ultiori. You ask, we answer.